Everybody who met Lee fell in love with him. He was just lovely. He was my only child. He was a bubbly, vivacious, absolutely life and soul of the party. It was quite a lot to Lee that maybe a lot of people didn't see or know about him, you know. He'd struggled in the last few years with mental health issues, and that led to basically drinking and taking drugs. But the 2 months before Lee passed, he was on the up. He was sorting his life out, a new job, you know, looking positive at the future. And they say life is too short and you don't know what's around the corner. And that's true. On the day of the 14th, the day Lee was killed, was a normal day. He had a job to do in Cardiff. Scaffolding, off he went. I went off to work as normal. And everything was fine. Spoke to him again then a few hours later. Yep, he was fine. I came home at 5:15 and he was trying to get out as I was trying to get in of the door because he was waiting for me because he couldn't find his keys. And off he went. And that was the last time I saw him.
I was on call as Senior Investigating Officer, the SIO, when I received a phone call to say that a male had been stabbed in the street in Newport and paramedics were working on him at the time. I soon had further information that came through to me to say that the male was deceased.
The phone rang about 5:45. It was one of his friends saying that he'd heard there was a stabbing in Maendy and that it was Lee. We got to Maendy and there was a big police presence. I couldn't see where to get to Lee, where he was. And a police officer came and asked me details and she confirmed that Lee had been stabbed. Utter shock and disbelief. It wasn't real. It doesn't happen to normal people, which we are. There's most of the time I don't believe it. I think he's going to come home. Part of my brain knows he's not. Well, all of my brain really. But there's always that doubt when you see somebody walk past the house that looks like him. Oh, he's coming in, and then you think, no, he's not. It's not him.
Scene guard had been put in place. There were lots of members of the public around as well, and police officers. Members of the public providing information as to what had happened. So my priorities at the time was to secure as much information as possible to fully understand the circumstances of what had happened. We could refer to it as the golden hour because that's the key sort of time where you can secure as much evidence as possible. And that's in various forms as well. So it's information from the witnesses, from the members of the public. It would be forensic opportunities at the scene as well, any digital opportunities or CCTV or anything like that really.
The first crucial bit of CCTV that was found was some CCTV that showed the stabbing taking place. So it was quite blurry. It was very sort of small and in the background, but what you could see is two males stood close to each other, where you can assume it's the stabbing taking place. We
didn't have any identity as to who was responsible for the murder of Lee Crewe. That was something that was obviously very key because we had an unknown suspect at an unknown location. We didn't know where they were. We didn't know the risks that they posed to other members of the public or to themselves as well.
The offender actually runs past the camera. So from that we were able to identify the tracksuit that was worn by the offender. It was quite a distinctive tracksuit.
Throughout that first evening, and it was just past midnight really, that we identified an image of the person that we believed responsible from local shop CCTV.
Approximately an hour before the offence, the offender had entered the shop, bought a bottle of water and some food, but that shop had a really good image of his face and of him wearing the tracksuit.
However, we still didn't know who this person was, and it was through the local knowledge of the neighbourhood police inspector that we were able to identify a name and raise David Sisman as a suspect. After raising David Sisman as a suspect, we then had to locate him, and so inquiries were made in order to do that. David Sisman had gone to Bristol to meet somebody for a date, and it was following this on his way back that he was then arrested.
When he was arrested, he was more concerned about his vehicle than the fact he'd been arrested for murder.
And to obtain evidence by questioning. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something you later...
Once in custody, David Sisman was interviewed at length by trained officers. In interview, he declined to comment at first. He would make no comment at all. He didn't provide any account or any details as to his movements, what happened, why it happened, or his involvement in it at all. So he'd spend a period of time with his head on the desk, and at other times then again he just wouldn't engage with the officers at all. We also had to continue the investigation and other inquiries in order to sort of build our case.
So we were still trying to capture as much footage as we can to find other opportunities that we'd be able to link David Sisman to this offence. So we tracked his movements both before and after the incident. But the key things that we found was that after the incident, he ran to an area of Newport known as the Gleeblands, which is like a big green area. There's no CCTV footage around there. There is the River Usk. We've made an assumption that the knife has probably been thrown into the River Usk. So after he leaves the Gleeblands and he walks around that area of Newport, that sort of St Julian's area of Newport, and he goes down Sickert Close and into another sort of area of Newport where there would be no CCTV. So at the end of Sickert Close, there's a underpass that goes underneath the M4. He comes out 20 minutes later and then goes home. And when he comes out of his home, he is wearing a different tracksuit. He walks back to Sickert Close and back to the area where he was before, only this time he has a bag on his back. It's like a white JD sports bag. And when he goes into that area at the end of Sickert Close, he's wearing the bag. And when he comes out, he's not. We assume that in that bag was the first tracksuit, the one he was wearing when he stabbed Lee Crewe. And we assume that he disposed of it in that area at the end of Sickert Close. When David Sisman was arrested, his car was searched, and within his car was a different JD bag. And inside that JD bag was tracksuit number 2.
So this investigation was quite unusual and challenging insofar as with our usual sort of lines of inquiry such as forensics, witnesses, digital work, none of that was really used or available in this case. There weren't any witnesses to the actual offence. We never located the weapon. We never located the clothing that Sisman wore when the actual murder took place. And that's quite unusual in a murder investigation. What we did have, however, was the CCTV, and that was absolutely key. David Sisman pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder. He did admit that he was the person responsible for stabbing Lee Crewe. David Sisman's defence case was basically that he acted in self-defence and that Lee Crewe had been aggressive and threatening towards him. The actual murder was captured on CCTV and we were able to enhance this footage. Within that footage, you can see that there's some verbal engagement between both males. But you also see then Sysman draw a knife out from his clothing, and you can see Lee Crewe retreating. It's then that Sysman has then struck him once to the chest area, and that was that fatal strike. I think the consequences of that are completely tragic. It's devastating. It's devastating for his family, for his friends, and it's also devastating for Sysman's life. He will be spending 24 years in custody, and I think it's just a really stark reminder of the dangers of carrying a knife.
I was so relieved the jury found him guilty of murder, and I don't think I grieved until November when he was actually sentenced. It's a very hard process to go through, a very lonely process. And something that nobody should go through, let alone a parent, losing your child like that. The only thing I think about is Lee and the good times now. Because you've got to carry on with life for him, as hard as it is. And some days I don't want to get out of bed. He wouldn't want that. Lee would want us to carry on and live our lives.